Yes, your eyes aren't deceiving you. The for real news is back. I'm Ramon, bold like a leopard. And despite all of the crazy chaos that's happening around the world today, there was a terror attack in Hamburg. There is this massive conflagration happening in Venezuela, which there's a fourth episode out now of Testigo Venezuela. I'm taking a little time to talk about the news outlet that won't report on that, the real news, which I'm sure it's only one of several leftist outlets that does that, but why not? I mean, they claim to be independent media, and yet they seem to have a very hard handle on what independent media is. And in this episode of my video, we take on one of their videos where we kind of wrestle with what that definition is. So what is independent media? You could look at it at two different angles. There's the editorial angle, and then there's the business angle. The business angle is very simple. Is your outlet owned by a larger company that gives directives as far as the editorial line or writes the checks for you? If it is, to a certain extent, you can't call yourself independent media. Okay, so that's one definition. Another definition is who calls the shots as far as which stories you cover. And I'd have to say that there's not a lot of people that in that respect you can call independent media. I think I can call myself independent, whatever it is I do, commentary or analysis. I don't go out and do stories on the street. There are a few people that do that. There's Tim Pool. The people at InfoWars claim that they do it. The people at TYT claim that they do it. I don't think that TYT is being very truthful because they do have alliances with larger outlets like Google, and I think they have an alliance. They have some sort of partnership with Al Jazeera, or they used to. So independent media is a hard definition to tackle. And that's where you have outlets like The Real News. They kind of wrestle in the weeds. What they think independent media are people that have opinions that they consider unorthodox. However, you may notice that nowadays those opinions are pretty much, if they're not the conventional opinions in the general public, among media figures, they're certainly not alternative opinions anymore. They're the mainstream. In fact, they've been the mainstream for many, many years. It's just the networks have had a hard time acknowledging that they have a slant towards a certain side, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's the conflicts overseas, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. Back in the day, there were a lot of reporters that were against Vietnam. Why? Because I think a lot of them didn't want to be sent there. That's regardless of whether you agreed with the war or not. So let's dig into their story on the independent media from the standpoint of The Real News, which claims also to be independent media.
Welcome to The Real Baltimore. I'm your host, Jessel Noor. If there's a city that needs a strong media to cover policing, poverty, and government, it's Baltimore. But two outlets for progressive voices and challenging power may be silenced forever. The Baltimore Sun Media Group, which also owns the Baltimore Sun, announced it would close the city paper, a 40-year-old alt-weekly, citing declining ad revenue as the reason. But that explanation has come under fire as critics have noted the paper staff had recently voted to join the Newspaper Guild. Meanwhile, radio host Mark Steiner, a veritable Baltimore institution, will be going off the air at Morgan State's WEAA this month. I recently spoke to Mark.
And it's a giant hole. I mean, my show and the city paper were bastions of the progressive media in town that spoke truth to power, didn't coddle up the politicians, really tried to get real people on the show. By real people, I mean community people, and representatives of the black community and of the revolutionary community and community organizers. Who's going to do it now?
So this is a funny way of him expressing it. First of all, he reveals his bias very, very clearly. He talks about we would talk to black people and revolutionary people. What the hell does that mean? I mean, seriously, that's really a question where I think you have to start to ask are they talking about people that are, you know, a revolutionary person? What do? They cause a ruckus. They start agitating for disorder. That's what I think in my mind. Now, you know, there's other connotations to the word revolutionary where, you know, you could talk about revolutionary guitarist Eddie Van Halen or whatever. They're not really talking about that here. This is clearly you know, a media member who has a clear and present bias towards a certain side of the political spectrum, and he has a problem with his show being taken off the air.
That's the problem. And you saw what happened with Port Covington, so that the corporate interests of the city are having their day, and the other voice is not being heard. And it's media like ours, like yours, that actually lets that happen, that allows that to happen. You look at what happened in the struggle for freedom in America. There are times when there are setbacks, but it doesn't mean it's over. It means we're still pushing, and new forms will arise, and will arise in new form. Folks in the city paper will arise in new form, so it's not done.
The question now is...
So before we go further, is he really portraying the issue here accurately? Well, let's take a look at what the Mark Steiner show really means in terms of, you know, the Baltimore media and actually the station that he's a part of. So this is from the Baltimore Sun, which more on them later. They play a huge part. This is their take on what's going on with Mark Steiner, and you'll hear a little angle that was not mentioned in the Real News feature.
24 years on public radio in Baltimore. He will be leaving the airwaves at WEAA-FM as of July 31st. This is pretty big news. Steiner is a fixture. He says he wants to do longer form productions at his Center for Emerging Media. Now, the Center for Emerging Media, which Steiner founded, he and the center won a Peabody Award in 2007 for a series called Just Words, which talked with workers in the area, especially the working poor. So Steiner has a track record here. The other thing he said is that Morgan State University, which runs WEAA, informed him recently that if he wanted a new contract, it would include no financial support, essentially, from Morgan State University, meaning he and the Center for Emerging Media would have to raise all their own money. So, Steiner leaving the airwaves is a very big deal.
So what goes here that was left unsaid in the other one, or not even mentioned? Perhaps Steiner mentioned it, and they didn't include it in the report. This was a financial issue, again, where you have a public radio station, in fact, that did not want to pay for content produced privately through his independent company. This doesn't really have to do with silencing progressive media. It has to do with them saying, look, I mean, we're a public radio station. We also, you'll see later, they also have an additional reason why they wanted to discontinue this.
I wonder what the reaction is going to be. I asked him too, because he produces his own show at Center for Emerging Media. I asked him, hey, if somebody else comes to you and says they want to carry your show, are you going to do that? He kind of hedged his bets a little bit, said he's open to it, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think at 70 years of age, Mark Steiner might be ready for a change, and the changing dynamics of the media marketplace, he may be ready for it. And I also have to say this, he's really positioned himself for the changing digital landscape with his center. He has worked with younger journalists. So, full disclosure, I was a regular with Steiner back in the 90s when he was on WJHU radio. I was a regular on his show on WYPR. Steiner is as deeply connected to this community as any local public radio show host in the country. His leaving the airwaves, it's a loss.
So that's a nice send-up for Mark Steiner, but what goes unsaid here too in the video is what goes down here. And it says that Dwayne Wickham, dean of the school, Morgan State University, which is another one of the owners of the station, said Tuesday that he had informed Steiner that the school would no longer be contributing to the production of his program. While he praised Steiner in the show, he said it did not fit with the new direction the school was headed. Mark Steiner does a quality show, and I highly respect the job he does, Wickham said in a telephone interview, but the primary mission of the School of Global Journalism and Communication is education. The radio station is, in fact, a learning lab here at the university, a place where students can get, hopefully, a high-quality education in the production of news and public affairs content. Wickham said when he turned his attention to the radio station this year, he saw an operation that was not serving its educational goals. He says, "What I saw was an organization that had lost its way," he said. "All our programming was done by professionals, and students had very little involvement in the production of the content. And I could not justify continuing to fund Mark Steiner's show, as fine a show as he has." Wickham said Steiner's contract, which was negotiated before he became dean, called for the school to pay him $100,000 a year to bring his show to Morgan, as well as about $9,000 for a producer. That's actually kind of average for a lot of producers. I think a lot of production work is done part-time. And then on top of that, the contract allows Mark Steiner's company to solicit underwriting for the show and keep the money, Wickham said. "It's a quality show, but we just can't afford it." Not renewing Steiner's contract, according to Wickham, is part of the larger transformation to serve the school's educational mission. And it says, Wickham said the school recently brought in Morel Gringanois, former publisher of the Chronicle of Higher Education, as interim general manager to start that change process. Okay, then it goes on to talk about his past career and everything. All of his accomplishments, and he has a lot of accomplishments, but there's I think there's a huge difference between keeping somebody on a radio station. There's a lot of commercial radio that's still successful, but we're talking about a state-funded, historically black college university, HBCUs. I think I've done a video on HBCUs sometime during the winter, and I published an opinion piece last year about Wendy Williams and the HBCUs. And basically what I'm saying here is that, yeah, Mark Steiner's show is not going to be on the air on public radio. And so what? That really doesn't... In fact, it's technically going to be more independent media if he's not funded by an NPR-affiliated station, which is what WEAA is. So this is not independent media. I'm sorry to tell these guys. So I think that after watching that rundown by the Real News and then the Baltimore Sun of what's happening with this radio host, Mark Steiner, I get the sense that, yes, this is an award-winning journalist, but he's not an independent journalist, first of all. When you work for an NPR-affiliated radio station, that's not independence. You're working for NPR. The other thing that I notice is that they're hiding the real reason behind it, which is that the school wants to use the monies that would be going to production of the show, professional production, by the way, which is, it comes at a premium compared to student production, if you know anything about student radio. And they want to use it in order to help students, learn digital media, which I guess that's the point of a college radio station. Let's see what the Real News does when tackling the other type of independent media that they're talking about, independent newspapers.
How will the latest casualties of media atrophy affect the city? And what does the future hold for the local media in an ever-shifting digital landscape? To help me answer these questions are three guests. Brandon Soderberg is the editor-in-chief of the Baltimore City paper and a team member of Democracy in Crisis, a website reporting on the Trump and D.C. politics and sending its reporting out to 20-plus alt-weeklies every week. Rebecca Kirkman came.
He doesn't really pan to the camera to these people. I'm surprised that, they didn't pick up some of the professional production people from the other shows that are closing. So if you want to narrow it down, the guy he's talking about is the man on the left in black with the weird haircut from it looks like he's a member of The Cure.
To Baltimore for art school in 2010. She's currently the visual arts editor at the city paper. And Baynard Woods is the
There they were able to figure out, the cameramen, that you focus on the girl that looks like she's been kidnapped by a religious cult.
founder of Democracy in Crisis, a website, podcast, and column syndicated in more than 20 alt-weeklies. He's the editor-at-large at the Baltimore City paper. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay, and that would be the man at the right who looks like he's Gary Busey's illegitimate child.
So let's start with you, Baynard. A lot of people want to know what the connection is between the Sun Media Group saying they're going to shutter the city paper and the recent vote to unionize the paper itself. And a Baltimore Sun reporter, Scott Dance, tweeted that the staff were notified at the same meeting that their union was going to be voluntarily recognized and that the closing of the city paper was imminent.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, while I have a title and stuff, editor-at-large.
So, before we get through his bullshit, which we're going to fast forward, he's going to come in later. Most of this is just crap that they're complaining about what he just talked about. That the city paper, which is Baltimore's so-called alternative newspaper, which is part of the Baltimore Sun media network, which is part of the Tronc media empire, which is traded on NASDAQ, they decided to unionize. And in a climate where I can tell you, and I don't think I need to tell you, that newspapers are doing pretty bad. They're not being picked up by people. The ad revenue is going down. Everything that you can do on a newspaper, you can pretty much do on a blog online. And people don't have time to read them. We have an alternative newspaper in the city I live in. They put out some pretty funny stories once in a while, but they have horrible editorial standards in terms of proofreading. And we'll get a little piece, a little nugget of what. And I just said nugget. Well, you'll see what I'm talking about. That's pretty much one of the problems where you see these people, they unionize, and then they don't understand the business you're in is already shitty. They don't want to keep paying you guys, and they're trying to make it profitable as much as they can, and you just won't let them. And that's what's driving the demise of this so-called alternative media, which I still refuse to. I think they say at some point that this is independent media. It's not independent media, not by either definition. Let's talk about how they actually discuss the issues and how they really show their I don't know what to say, their talent for verbiage. Let's see how they tackle the issue of criminal justice reform.
As well, that's willing to really challenge these policies. You talk a little bit about how what the city paper does in terms of unapologetically taking on power in the city.
Yeah, so fuck mandatory minimums, like fuck them.
Yes, this is their policy. They will, I can go on camera and, I could just say fuck Obamacare, or, I've actually asked somebody, if you don't want to listen to why, I could give you a 10-minute summary about why Obamacare is garbage and why it's bad for progressives and bad for conservatives and bad for anybody who needs to buy health insurance, aside from the people who are already, they're very rich and they can afford it, or they're getting it through some sort of deal. I can go through a whole 10-minute discussion about it. Or I could say to the same people, I've asked them, well, what do you want me to do in order to confirm your bias against me? Should I just say, Obamacare is gay or something, or Obamacare is Muslim, because that's how you think conservatives think about Obamacare? No. I can bring you figures and trends about Obamacare, about how the premiums are jumping and how the market is falling apart, and how it's really, and this is not something to be disputed. Obamacare is corporate welfare. In point of fact, there is no way there's incontrovertible, this isn't even a thing that needs to be proven. it is a policy that involves corporate welfare. And I've done it in numerous videos, time after time, in publications of mine. You know, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I can handle the issue well and, you know, articulate the whole point. Meanwhile, these people, they think the real journalism is saying fuck mandatory minimums.
Completely. So yeah, that's one of Pew's many bad ideas, maybe the worst one in terms of just pure. We all know that doesn't work. What the papers try to do is say stuff like that.
So they're trying to go up against this mayor of Baltimore, Justine Pugh, and say, oh well, everybody knows that mandatory minimums don't work. Well, maybe even if that is the case, you still have to make your argument, because there's people that are growing up now. Let's say in 5 to 10 years, there's people who are now in, you know, middle school or high school, and they haven't gone through the whole argument yet about why mandatory minimums are bad or good. They don't know yet, and that's why your job as a member of the press is to educate people about the issues, not to take it for granted that they know already. But you will see soon what this guy's idea of editorial, editorial content is. This guy will pretty much blow your mind with his scribe's pen of editorial brilliance. And I'm going to save that for a little later.
Fuck mandatory minimums, but we've never really had access. I'm kind of piggybacking on something Boehner's been saying a lot. We've talked about Trump as well. It's like the whole media is now confronted with the fact that the people in power don't feel like they need them anymore. And we've always felt like that. We've never had access. The police rarely answer our calls or our emails. I think we're a pain. So, and the mayor, I don't think he's a big fan of us. The previous mayor certainly wasn't. And so we've always seen that as our job to hold these people accountable and call bullshit on this stuff. And if you don't have that, you have other, what Real News does, what the Baltimore Brew here in the city does is good. But it's also, we're in a perfect position. We're not huge and we're not smaller. We're right in the middle. It's a weird place to be. We never quite fit, but that's good, especially if you want to question the people in power. And that's gone. We can't do that. I mean, there's even small things like right when the last mayor was going out, she banned an NPR reporter, and that's kind of.
Well, when you have NPR reporters like Mark Steiner, who was featured at the very beginning of the broadcast, they didn't even mention that he worked on an NPR affiliate, and he belongs to the revolutionary left. That's what he's talking about, that he represents those communities and that they come on his show and he's the outlet for them. Well, sometimes the city doesn't want to hear from them. That's really an issue of, you think that you have editorial control. Fine, you have editorial control. That doesn't mean that people are required to just listen to you. Okay, so in this clip, you're going to see one of their guys, the Gary Busey guy, kind of make he makes a valid point, and then he completely makes up for it by talking about something that is kind of bullshit.
The White House press briefing summon. Everyone's outraged that Jim Acosta with CNN doesn't get called on at a press conference, and they're not outraged at the reporters who are being charged with the alleged crimes of people that they're covering during a demonstration and are facing 70 years in prison. They're not talking about Aaron Cantú. They're talking about Jim Acosta because he's a TV star in the same way that Donald Trump is.
Okay, the case that he's talking about, I do agree with him with that Jim Acosta thing with CNN. Who gives a fuck? The press can be called, whoever the press secretary wants to call on, in my opinion, they can call on them. They can call on the fucking, New Delhi Times or whatever in India, the Times of India. Fuck the Washington Post. Who gives a shit? You're going to call the same reporters every day. I always wondered why the same assholes always get more time. Well, they kind of make up for it by mentioning this Aaron Cantú dude. Okay, for the Aaron Cantú story, we're talking about a man he's a native of McAllen, Texas. That's right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And It says McAllen native and journalist Aaron Cantú was indicted May 30th on 2 counts of felony rioting conspiracy and 5 counts of destruction of property. He faces up to 75 years after a January 20th mass arrest on Inauguration Day in Washington, D.C. Prosecutors dismissed charges for all journalists with the exception of Cantú and photographer Alexei Wood, who live-streamed the protest. Cantú is scheduled for arraignment on Friday, June 9th. The 28-year-old was reporting on the protest, according to his previous lawyer, Grandison Hill, who spoke to the Associated Press in January. Journalists have a constitutional right to cover protests, whether those protests are peaceful or not, said Executive Director of the ACLU of the District of Columbia, Monica Hopkins Maxwell, in a statement a week after the incident. On January 20th, a group of Black Bloc protesters, individuals donning black, marched from Logan Circle to 12th and L Streets, where the masses, including demonstrators, journalists, and observers, were corralled. Journalists are not above the law and have no right to incite a riot or engage in acts of assault or vandalism. But the reason for Mr. Cantú's arrest, however, seemed to be exactly the same as the other 6 journalists who have now seen the charges against them dropped, wrote media rights advocates from Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press in a letter to the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. Channing D. Phillips on February 27th. They were covering protesters and were therefore in the vicinity when a few of those protesters apparently threw rocks or smashed store windows with hammers. But being near a newsworthy event is no crime for anyone, reporters included. So there's very little real facts available about what Cantú did or did not do. What the journalists like this Bayard Nelson, I think that was his name. I'm just going to call him Gary Busey Jr. What they're claiming is that, he was arrested for doing his job as a journalist. I don't think that's the case. I think that there's probably incriminating evidence or something that was caught on video, since they live streamed the event, that he took part in the riot. Now, am I sure that happened? No. And am I going to say that he's going to be convicted? No, because I know the way that the law works, and it depends who his attorney is going to be and what's going to happen and what the plea bargains are for some of these protesters. And that's the way it is. And they're trying to make it out like he's some sort of big prisoner of conscience. I don't think that it really is the case. I think that what we're talking about here is an issue of a journalist who got too caught up in the story that he was covering and may have actually participated in the event itself, which is actually a violation of journalistic ethics. And now he's trying to hide behind his journalistic credentials in order to avoid the charges against him. Now, could I be wrong? Sure. Or, the opinions that I give about what people do, are they necessarily fact? No, they're my opinion. Just like my opinion on how Kaepernick's protest was fake. I still think it was a fake protest. I don't think he really believes in the crap he showed up with a Fidel Castro t-shirt one day. He's like, yeah, Fidel Castro helped a lot of black people. How much did you read about that? These are things that people are being taught to say just so that they can appear to be smart. And that's what I think is happening in this case. So far, we've seen that the city paper has taken like a very distinct slant against the Trump administration, against the police, against Baltimore establishment politicians. So that's a fairly consistent progressive stance. But this whole thing where they're portraying themselves as the only outlet for that, I think, is ridiculous. For one thing, I don't know if you really need a local affiliate for that, since a lot of that progressive shit people get nationally from publications all across the country. Unicorn Riot, for example, I turn to them sometimes when I need a little laugh, but they consider themselves like an outlet for the anarchist movement, Antifa, things like that. Now, what are we talking about when we actually see the real news and, interview these guys about the business end of this? Well, I think you see a lot of incoherence. Here's an important clip of Gary Busey Jr. actually saying something right.
And this is the same transparency at all weeklies rather than balance. And this false balance is what brought us Trump and what brings us Pew and what allows these horrible ideas to get off the...
There is no false balance. There is no balance at all. You have the majority of media is supporting people like you. And that's why they bought you, and for a long time they kept you in your clothes. The clothes that are on your back are bought by corporate media. Those are the people who signed your checks. And if you had a problem with that, then maybe you should have just gone and founded your own newspaper when the Baltimore Sun bought the city paper, because this is ridiculous. You can't continue to play with this charade that you're independent media. You were independent media probably even before the Sun bought you. You've been independent media only maybe on your blog or whatever the hell it is. But now you're getting a taste of what real markets do. It means that you cannot continue to manufacture this charade that you're a media that is responsive to what really is going on in America. You represent an urban elite, especially in a city like Baltimore, where a lot of people are much poorer than you are. And you think that now, because you're under threat, because your business model is falling apart, that people have to mobilize in order to save your failed paper. Here, Gary Busey Jr. kind of has to deal with the fact that not just his so-called independent city paper is going down the drain, but so is the corporate Baltimore Sun.
People think their editors are supporting them well, or their business structure is supporting them well, and I think that goes across the board. But it is a weird time for us now that everyone's send a pizza to CNN or whatever kind of thing and defend journalism, when part of why we were founded was to do media criticism and to critique the mainstream media, which now the right wing has sort of gotten it seems like almost a monopoly on. And I mean, the irony is that
you never really criticized the real mainstream media. I mean, there's such nobody pays attention to what some, freely distributed paper in Baltimore is doing in terms of critiquing the mainstream media, because you have people that are sitting there looking basically like they just crawled out of their dorm bunk bed 18 years after they started their Bachelor's of Arts degree in Mayan pottery. That's the image that you're projecting. So why should you even be able to look? There's plenty of space for you to critique the media, but when you're actually working for the same media company that you're critiquing, the argument just rings a little hollow.
The Sun says right in November is when they were thinking about starting to shut down the city paper, right when they introduced their Journalism Matters Today More Than Ever campaign, and it's just a slap in the face.
And Rebecca, I wanted to talk to you about the city paper as a way to develop local writers.
You're going to see some real professional charisma right here.
And to give local writers an outlet and a place to have to make their home. You started off as an intern there. Talk about what you learned and continue to learn in your work there.
Yeah, so I started as an intern in 2013, and I had always enjoyed writing, but had never written for a publication before, and I learned a lot, especially from Baynard. Line by line, we would go... We would edit my work, and I was writing mostly art reviews and some artist profiles, and it was finding this balance between criticism and telling the reader what's going on here, but also finding a way in for creativity and personal, if you want to bring in a personal essay kind of approach to it too, I'm just really about breaking down genres and boundaries, I guess, but finding a new way into writing about something and experiencing art and why it's important to experiment with that. And so yeah, I would not have ever written for the paper if I hadn't gone through the internship program and been kind of a freelancer here and there afterwards. And then when I was hired in 2014, I was kind of thrown into the fire as the internship coordinator, and suddenly was managing a bunch of people who were not much younger than me, and so that has, developed and changed over the years, and I've gotten more responsibilities also over the years, and eventually became the arts editor. And we've had a lot of interns come through the program every few months, and a lot of them have done really great work, both just like behind the scenes,
like
doing fact checking, learning how a story is constructed, just by having to look at every sentence and determine what needs to be verified, and how do we verify this, and how do we make sure that this is the right way and this is the right phrasing. I learned a lot that way also as an intern, and I think that our past interns have learned something from that. And then, they've gotten to write whatever kind of, they take initiative. If they take enough initiative, they can write however many pieces they want to write for the paper while they're an intern, and learn from editors line by line, hopefully, and get something out of it, and then go on to other things. And
then Jaisal Noor, who I guess does as good of a job as you can moderating this clusterfuck, he gets into the whole area of business where they seem to really lose themselves on the trail.
Some have said that resources have been starved from the city paper over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. That's also probably true of the Sun to some extent, to a lesser extent. But yeah, I mean, I think that cutting is the way that these newspaper businesses save money. They don't, or even allegedly earn money is by cutting. All looks good on like a chart or a graph or whatever, and that's what they're worried about. But yeah, more recently, I mean, if it goes down to like a freelance budget or a position, I'm going to make sure I'd rather lose the freelance budget. Unfortunately, the biggest thing we lose in that, especially in the past few months, especially now, which we don't have one anymore, which again makes sense. They're not going to spend a lot of money for us right now. We're dead to them. But what you lose in that is you lose all these other voices. So like I started the paper in 2007 as a freelancer. I was the dude with a blog, and I got a chance to talk to one of the editors there, and he gave me an assignment. I built it from there. My career as a writer, which is now where I am, I was going to say it peaked. I hope it doesn't peak here, but as the editor of the papers in 2007.
Let's read a little about where his career has peaked, and if this is the peaking moment, then this is no F. Scott Fitzgerald that you're seeing in front of you. This is an article by the same guy, Brandon Soderberg. It's called "The High Life Mystery Weed Greyhaven, Reviewed and in Praise of Smoking in Public." And I guess he found this little art thing that's connected to Greyhaven. It says, "I'm smoking a bougie apartment complex on the edge of the city with hella amenities. I'm smoking a charming supporting character with a mysterious past from an 80s soap opera. I'm smoking a third-tier metal band signed to Metal Blade that opened for Fate's Warning in 1986. I'm smoking Greyhaven, a mysterious weed strain, a sativa I'm pretty sure, with a lithe smell. Who knows really, because there's no information about Greyhaven online, and no one I know has heard of it, and my dealer told me it was new, and he might be pulling my chain, but then again, I'm constantly asking him for what I've not already smoked, being a weed critic and all, and so I'm bound to end up with something in my bong and not a whole lot of information about it. Or maybe, probably, my dealer misunderstood or misheard his connect, and perhaps this is some heaven-related strain. There are many, including Blue Heaven, Heaven's Gate, Heavenly OG, and so on, and he just spelled heaven wrong on the baggie. But asking around about Greyhaven yields no information either. A weird weed for sure. Its molting high is flexible, like transition lenses. It changes up. A deep pensive high inside. Something more chillaxed when I left the house. And that was probably around 5 p.m. And Greyhaven's dense smoke set off my fire alarm, which might be why it's called Greyhaven, due to the massive gray cloud it left in my little apartment. Baltimore, not just my apartment, will soon smell like weed the way Washington, D.C. currently smells like weed. We can only hope. Decriminalization has been going on here for a few years now. Medicinal dispensaries are finally on their way, and so begins Maryland's slow and steady crawl towards legalization. For reals, maybe, barring some truly bonkers legislation from Burning Cross and sentient form Jeff Sessions, which we should consider a real responsibility. A Washington Post, see, that's how they usually, you know, I mean, I want you to understand something. I don't support Jeff Sessions because of his drug policy. I don't even do drugs. But they're blending rumors and innuendo about him being a Klan member, which never actually has been. It's actually, there's more evidence completely to the contrary that he was not a Klan member and was actually prosecuting the Klan very frequently than that he is a Klan member. And they have yet to produce any evidence in the affirmative that he was a Klan member. But this is how they do it. They want to mix something that is true, his drug policy, with something that has absolutely no basis in fact, which is his Klan membership. A Washington Post story by Maya Silber from earlier this month, accompanied by an illustration of a Washington Monument-sized joint from CP contributor Alex Fine, by the way, titled "It's Summer in Washington Smells Like Weed Everywhere All the Time," addresses the obvious byproduct of legislation that nevertheless shocks everybody. You smell weed way more when it's no longer illegal to smoke it. By the way, where I live, I smell weed all the time, everywhere. The piece is a funny meta-alarmist scene report, though a touch puritanical still and oh so DC. This is the same crap that he says here. During Pride last month, weed wafted from all directions. During the parade especially, and later on that night when Big Freedia's boozy bounce songs got full-bodied and blunted, and a combination of her music playing at a crazy loud volume, and because of, well, the crazy amount of loud being smoked all around her. It was that music is changing, drugs are changing, even men and women are changing speech in train spotting right there happening on North Charles Street, if only for a couple of days, but still aggressively queered, hard as fuck party music, pounding as everybody, plenty of them proudly gender fucked, partied and smoked up like it's not a big deal, because it isn't a big deal. So that's the type of quality writing that they bring from the city paper. That's what they're complaining. That's why they need a union, for this guy to produce these inane, weed hallucination articles. You don't need to work for a paper to do that. You can just blog. This isn't enriching anybody's morning. You pick, and that's why these papers are only produced weekly. First of all, these people couldn't get enough work done in a day to fill a paper. And second of all, this isn't news. This is not news. It's just crap. It's stream of consciousness nonsense. And the era when this was really a necessity, when people needed the newspapers in order to get those types of articles out, is gone. There are people that are all the time founding new, not just blogs. They're founding video logs. I mean, what the fuck am I doing here? Did I need the Baltimore Sun to finance what I'm doing right now? No. I have a day job. That's what I did. So what do they say when they're confronted with actually somebody doing something about their alternative, or, let's say secondary paper being bought out? Well, take a look.
The city paper in Baltimore isn't the only paper that's sort of in crisis right now. And many are shutting down around the country, but last week the Chicago Sun-Times was bought by a group of unions and former politicians that sort of all pitched in and were able to buy it, instead of it going to a media conglomerate which also owns the Baltimore Sun Media Group. Have you looked at options like that, or have you talk a little bit more about what you're sort of looking at as far as keeping the paper going?
So I don't. Again, to be clear, I'm campaigning for a paper that I have no control over other than I edit the content in it. But that's certainly encouraging. I mean, the two things that are amazing about that is the dude who kind of was in charge of it said it was going to be a paper for the working class. Holy shit, that's awesome. And the other thing that's crazy is like the kind of guy in charge of financial restructuring in that press statement or whatever basically admitted, look, these papers don't make a lot of money. It's really kind of a service. We need to start understanding that. So whether that moves into a nonprofit or if another conglomerate of a bunch of cool lefties want to buy us or start something new, those are these kind of pie in the sky ideas. But I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I feel like the profit margins in a successful year for an alternative weekly are about 5 to 10%. Like I think 5% is like a good year. This is not how these papers work. And so when you start looking at all this stuff as hard numbers, if we're spending X to make X, and you're within sort of a larger structure, that just looks terrible. When the one thing is here and the one thing is here, they gotta find a way to fix that, make it look like they're making more money, basically.
And so the Sun Media Group cited declining ad revenue, but that doesn't mean you're in the red right now.
Right. It means we're still, from what I understand, we're still profitable. We're not very profitable. But I could say that if we were maybe.
Could it be that by unionizing, you may have moved the marker so that you're now not profitable? That might be a very important business decision that you guys made.
Part of this larger corporate structure, that the amount of money we're making, if I got that money at the end of the year, I'd be really happy. I understand why a larger company, especially when it's publicly traded, has to answer to stockholders and stuff like that. Doesn't look so good for them. But so in terms of what we want to think about, I mean, there's a really interesting groups doing some nonprofit work or that kind of thing. There's a thing in Boston by Christopher Rohn, who's the editor of the news editor, or he's the editor-in-chief now of Dig Boston, which is the alt in Boston. Christopher Rohn's a fucking amazing writer, and he started this thing called Binge, the Boston Institute of Nonprofit Journalism, and he's kind of funding journalism for Dig, but also a lot of other places through a nonprofit. That's an interesting model that I think I'm considering, Boehner and I have been talking about. And related to that, I would say that obviously someone buy us or someone's helped us out, but we're like, the city paper is just a symptom of this larger thing, which is this.
So Stoner translation, okay, so basically what they're saying is, yeah, these are all good ideas, so we're gonna kind of mull it over, get some Funyuns, get some chimichangas, get some pizza, get some Taco Bell, get some Chipotle. That's a little too much Mexican. Get some Thai food. Get some. That's really the way that they've been talking about it. Maybe it's because, okay, so I'm being a little unfair. They were sprung upon by this idea that now they're going to have to sink or swim. But the unionization is a real issue, and the fact that they don't realize that they're already not a very profitable model, and now they're making it even less profitable, just shows what type of mentality they have. Anyway, so that's it for today, and I want to emphasize a few points that we learned. Okay, first of all, independent media, what is it? You don't have independent media if your master is a corporation that basically gives you the foot marching orders. So yeah, they could report on whatever they wanted. They had editorial discretion, whatever they wanted to put up, because they appeal to a certain market, but that market is drying up. So therefore, you're not independent if your master calls up and says, hey, you guys really, there's nobody who gives a fuck about what you're doing, so we're going to have to close you up because you cost a little too much and now you're asking for more. That's not independent media. If you really want independent media, you would probably buy your own paper, which they're talking about. So we'll see what happens. And if they do buy themselves, if the employees buy their own paper, I'd be interested how that affects their coverage. I mean, that could be pretty interesting. I don't think they're going to change. I'm just going to be interested as to maybe they'll have like a little more freedom, which you can't criticize. Now, the other issue about what independent really means is, if your editorial style is governed by somebody else, then you're not really independent media. Now, I don't think that in these cases, these people are covering whatever they want. So yes, in that respect, they might be independent media, but not when they claim. So so finally, summing up, if you have editorially independent outlets, whether they're newspapers or magazines or TV even, and then you could get into internet channels. If you have them editorially independent, but not corporately independent, not independent in terms of business, then I believe that they can't survive for very long, because at some point somebody's going to come in and say, hey, look, you can't, we're not interested in this crap. There's plenty of magazines that are going belly up. I'm waiting for one day Rolling Stone to go bankrupt. I think that their model is basically drying up, and that people aren't going to continue to buy their content, especially since they have pending lawsuits that could actually bankrupt them, Gawker style. But I could be wrong. The media is an unpredictable place. And it's not like I've had years and years of practice at doing this myself. This is kind of something that I do on the fly. So that's it. This is Ramon with the For Real News. This is independent media, right? I mean, by the way, shop at Sunoco for your gasoline. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any sponsors. Have a good night. And enjoy your last few weeks of independent media called the City Paper. The For Real News is sponsored by assholes like you, so pay up, motherfucker.